Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Jacory Croskey-Merritt, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 10 running back rankings for the 2025 fantasy football season, going over my top 36 running backs. So if you're looking for my thoughts on a specific player, you can travel down to the description. There are timestamps available below. While you're down in the description, if you have not yet already, of course, subscribe to the channel as I'm making daily fantasy football content in order to help you capture a 2025 fantasy football championship. Later tonight, I will be live streaming here on the channel talking about all news in regards to the trade deadline. Of course, Jakobi Meyers, Rashid Shaheed, the Jets hot selling their defense. Again, there's a lot of implications to these trades, so we'll talk about it over the course of tonight's live stream, while of course addressing some waiver wire pickups as we go into the Tuesday/Wednesday waivers. Outside of that, let's go ahead and begin by talking about some running back matchups going into Week 10 based on running back rushing statistics allowed by all 32 teams. As we can see, the Cincinnati Bengals, Tennessee Titans, Buffalo Bills, Giants, Ravens, Dolphins, etc. are the most advantageous matchups going into the given week based on rushing statistics allowed, rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. Unfortunately, we will not be able to take advantage of the Bengals and Titans matchups, as both of those teams, along with the Chiefs and Dallas Cowboys, who are also advantageous matchups, they are all on bye. But either way, I just wanted to go ahead and represent some of the more advantageous matchups going into the given week. And like I've mentioned before, the reason why I isolate rushing statistics is because receiving upside is primarily dependent on the running back skill, the quarterback's tendencies, and of course the game script and whether or not they need to pass heavy within the second half of a game to get the running back some utilization within the receiving category. Nonetheless, just wanted to represent some of the more advantageous and also some of the more disadvantageous matchups. The running backs of the Houston Texans and Tampa Bay Buccaneers may have their hands full in regards to these defensive taking on the Jaguars and Patriots. Both of these defenses allowing less than 4 yards per carry to opposing running backs, and of course have been stout in terms of their run stopping efforts. The final thing I wanted to remind you guys before we get into my top 36 running back rankings, for those of you guys who want my all-encompassing rankings at running back, wide receiver, quarterback, tight end, kicker, defense, and flex for both half and full PPR, be sure to travel down to the description of the video and check out Betr. I'll be partnering with them for the entirety of the season, not only to provide Sunday morning rankings to help you set your lineups and capture a 2025 fantasy football championship, but to provide plays. Later tonight, of course, we have a couple NBA games on the slate. I like Joel Embiid going more than 19.5 points, and I like Cole Anthony going more than 7.5 points. Those two players for a 2.7x, I like the potential of that. So for those of you who want to go ahead and get my rankings, put together some plays, use code Andrew today, make that first time deposit minimum of 10 and make that first time play to get those rankings sent from my email directly to yours. All that information down in the description. And for those of you who sign up today using code Andrew, you get a free $10 and a free play. So take advantage of the opportunity and make sure you're eligible based on the map to the right side of the screen. Thank you very much. Okay, let's get into talking about my top 36 running back rankings, beginning with our number one, Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers, who is coming off of an incredible 31.8 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. We've talked about it ad nauseum over the course of this entire year. He is truly on pace to be able to surpass 1,000 rushing and receiving yards, coming off of another game of 5 catches, 67, and a receiving touchdown just through the air. If we isolated all of his receiving statistics just by themselves, he would be the number 7 overall wide receiver in 2025. Now, going into this week, yes, they do have a difficult matchup taking on the LA Rams, but last time out against the Rams, had 57 on the ground, 8 catches on 9 targets, 82 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown for nearly 24 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. In 3 of the last 5 games, we have seen Christian McCaffrey with 30 or more touches. This offense is going to continue to lean upon their best player, and this game is implicated to being the highest scoring game of the week, so expect for a lot of upside from Christian McCaffrey. All right, moving on to our number 2, we have Jonathan Taylor to close out the S tier. Look, it took 3 interceptions and 3 fumbles lost for the Colts to just lose by 7 points. That was one of the more fluky games of the week, and I'm anticipating for a bounce-back performance going into the London matchup this week. Early on Sunday morning, we will see the Indianapolis Colts taking on the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons, who are allowing over 13 fantasy points per game on the ground, 4.31 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs, and have allowed the following statistics to opposing running backs just over the course of the last 7 weeks. New England, 90 rushing yards from their running backs, 1 rushing touchdown. Miami, 141 on the ground. San Francisco, 165 and 2 touchdowns. Washington, 109. Carolina, 103 and a touchdown. I'm anticipating for over 100 yards, probably a couple touchdowns in a huge game and a huge bounce back for Jonathan Taylor, while this offense won't be turning over the ball at the rate at which they did this most recent week. Our number 3, we have Bijan Robinson in this same matchup. Like I mentioned earlier, this is going to be a London game this upcoming Sunday morning. The game starts at 6:30 a.m. PST. I'll be live streaming here on the channel starting at 6 a.m. for 4 straight hours. So if you have any questions, be sure to swing on by. I'll be answering questions and I'll have up-to-date rankings on screen because, as you know, rankings are always subject to change. But in regards to the potential of Bijan Robinson, he is game script proof regardless of whether or not we do anticipate to see the Colts find themselves victorious this week. The Colts are currently 6.5-point favorites within this matchup. So in the event in which Bijan Robinson isn't allowed to run the ball very much so in the late stages of this game because they're down a significant volume, we have seen Bijan Robinson get 6+ receptions in 3 of the last 4 games. Again, he is purely game script proof. And in this most recent game, coming off of 96% of the overall snaps played, because again, when you want to win these games, you have to have your best player on the field for the vast majority of the time. I'm anticipating to see a lot of utilization from Bijan Robinson and hopefully a couple big runs within the upcoming week to keep this game close in the early going. Number 4, we have James Cook. Speaking of big runs, taking on the Miami Dolphins this week is as easy as it's possibly going to get, especially with his history of success taking on the Dolphins. They are the 6th best matchup at the position, allowing nearly 16 fantasy points per game and 5.06 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs. I mean, earlier this season against them in week 3, he had 19 carries for 108 and a touchdown, 19.3 fantasy points, and they really just kind of floundered in the second half. If it wasn't for that, James Cook could have very easily gone for 200+ yards if they continue to give him the rock, just like this most recent game in which he found himself with 114 yards against the Kansas City Chiefs, and of course over 200 yards against the Carolina Panthers the week before. But nonetheless, we have seen many of running backs find success against this backfield, specifically Baltimore 132, Atlanta 43 and a touchdown, Cleveland 92 and 3 touchdowns, the Chargers for 138, the Carolina Panthers for 228. Expect for James Cook to find a lot of success on the ground against Miami this week. Number 5. We have Josh Jacobs. Look, he continues his streak of success in terms of scoring touchdowns. He has scored 1 touchdown minimum in 16 of the last 17 games he has played for the Green Bay Packers. And now that Tucker Kraft is out, that means maybe even more potential for upside down near the red zone for Josh Jacobs. The last 2 times in which he has taken on the Eagles, who he has the privilege of taking on this week, in 2024, during the regular season and in the postseason, he found success in both games. But in the most recent contest, 18 carries for 81 and a rushing touchdown, 3 catches for 40 for 19.6 half PPR fantasy points. The Eagles, as we know, have struggled in terms of stopping the run thus far this season, allowing 14.08 fantasy points per game, the 11th best matchup at the position. Therefore, we have seen, of course, recently, Minnesota 61 and a touchdown, the Giants 114 and 3 touchdowns, Denver 91 and a touchdown, the LA Rams 146. If it wasn't for the fact that, of course, Cam Scatterbo went down with that injury early last game against the Philadelphia Eagles, we would have even seen more fantasy point contributions there. Expect for Josh Jacobs to do a lot of damage against the Eagles this week. Number 6, we have Jahmyr Gibbs, who is coming off of one of his worst performances that we have seen in quite a while. It's quite uncommon. I mean, the last time we saw him get this low of a yard volume and touch volume was last season against the Bears in 2024, late in the year. So again, it's incredibly uncommon in which he gets this kind of share of workload and doesn't perform in terms of fantasy purposes, primarily because, again, he had to be highly utilized as a pass blocking threat. The blitz percentages in which the Minnesota Vikings were sending in the direction of this Jared Goff-led offense did really limit the overall receiving workload that Jahmyr Gibbs would have been exposed to. Last time out earlier this season in week 1, when they were in a negative game script and they had to throw heavy in the second half, of course, Jahmyr Gibbs came away with 10 receptions against the Green Bay Packers in week 1. In this most recent week, only had 3 receptions, which is the biggest difference maker. Over the course of that game, Jahmyr Gibbs had to pass block 15 times. Again, that is not something that they need to expect him to do on a weekly basis, and I expect going into this upcoming weekend's matchup against Washington, in which they're 8.5-point road favorites, I would anticipate a road game in which they're going to get themselves some revenge against the Commanders, who took them out in the playoffs last year. Specifically, last time against this defense, Jahmyr Gibbs went for 32.5 fantasy points with over 175 yards and 2 touchdowns scored against them in the playoff performance. We have seen many of backfields find success against Washington as of late. Atlanta 126, 2 touchdowns, Chicago 133, Dallas 145 and a touchdown, Kansas City 106 and a touchdown, and Seattle 76 yards, while all the touchdowns went to the receiving options of that offense. Nonetheless, Jahmyr Gibbs should be in positions to succeed this week. Number 7. We have Rico Dowdle. The fact of the matter is that's all she wrote. Rico Dowdle is the outright starter as we approach for the remainder of the season and should continue to get himself an incredibly high volume of opportunity, not only in terms of touches, but of course snaps, coming away with 72% of the snaps in comparison to Chuba Hubbard's 22% in this most recent game. All while the quarterback, Bryce Young, can't find much success through the air. So they're going to continue to have to lean upon the run game and Rico Dowdle to carry this team as he has done in 3 of the last 6 performances in which this offense has put forth. Taking on the Saints is one of the best matchups you could possibly ask for. Yes, it's a division rival, but this is a defense that is allowing the 8th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, and their 3 most recent games against running backs consist of the LA Rams 172 and a touchdown, Tampa Bay 88 and a touchdown, and Chicago putting up 216 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns against that defense. Expect for a lot of success from Rico Dowdle, and hopefully we might find ourselves with a 200-plus yard game. You never know. Number 8, we have Kyren Williams. Speaking of the Los Angeles Rams' success most recently against the Saints, he's coming off of 114 yards and a rushing touchdown. Again, even though we have talked about the lack of overall red zone utilization from Kyren Williams this season, he has technically scored 3 touchdowns in the last 4 games, which again is relatively promising, but we're hoping for even more workload of opportunity near the goal line, especially when we have Davante Adams. Over the course of just the last 2 games alone, his last 5 receiving touchdowns have been from 2, 1, 3, 1, and 4 yards out. That's the yardage lines in which they're throwing the ball, just goal line fades in the direction of Davante Adams and continuing to find success. Hopefully we'll get more opportunity in terms of rushing this week as Kyren Williams has a revenge game taking on the 49ers. Last time out against them, fumbled on the goal line to score a touchdown, and of course in overtime on that 4th down run, got stuffed to lose the game. Last time out against this defense, still ran for 14 carries, 65 yards, 8 catches on 10 targets for 66 and 2 receiving touchdowns, scored 27 fantasy points. We're hoping for a big performance here in a revenge game against a division rival, which is implicated to be the highest scoring game of the week. Derrick Henry is our number 9. Look, there were multiple attempts in that Thursday night game against the Miami Dolphins on a short week in which late in the game, Derrick Henry broke it out to the outside and was literally one defender away from breaking out 60, 70, 80 yard runs. There were multiple events in which that could have occurred, and especially against the Dolphins, it wouldn't have been a surprise. But this week, he has an opportunity of redeeming himself against the Minnesota Vikings. And again, this is a Vikings matchup that is allowing over 14 fantasy points per game on the ground, the 13th best at the running back position, who have allowed over 120 rushing yards to Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and the Los Angeles Rams as of late. And even though the Detroit backfield of Jahmyr Gibbs and Montgomery weren't able to find themselves an abundance of success, still combined for 65 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. I expect for Henry to find the end zone. Again, this most recent week, Andrews, Kohler, Bateman all finding red zone receiving touchdowns. That's not going to be a weekly contribution. Expect for Henry to find the end zone and, of course, tack on a lot of yards alongside of it. Number 10, we have Saquon Barkley coming off of the bye week. Last time out in week 10, the last time we saw Saquon Barkley, he had 14 carries for 150 yards, 1 rushing touchdown, 4 catches for 24 and a receiving touchdown, 31.4 fantasy points, while not getting a single rushing attempt or touch in the 4th quarter alone. Now, he did sustain an injury in that game against the Giants last time out, which was a groin injury, and we're hoping that he's going to be healed and ready to go for this matchup against the Green Bay Packers, because in the last 2 games in which he has taken on the Green Bay Packers, he has been given 26 and 27 touches in both of those games. So we're hoping to get back to that kind of workload share of opportunity. Again, has scored a total of 3 touchdowns in one game, put up 32.2 in the other 13.3. If we can find the middle ground, score 18 plus points, that would be an incredible position, especially considering the Panthers rushing attack with no passing game just ran for 147 and 2 touchdowns against them in this most recent week. Number 11, we have Quinshon Judkins. As the Jets are fire sailing their 2 defensive stars, Sauce Gardner and of course Quinnen Williams, this primarily provides a lot of opportunity for Quinshon Judkins within the upcoming week to come away with a big performance. Now, in the last week in which we saw him, very similar to Saquon Barkley, he did sustain an injury, an AC shoulder sprain. Now, in the event in which that is going to be something that plagues him, like we saw with Jordan Mason last year as a member of the 49ers, where he sustained a very similar injury, and at any given moment during a game, got hit and had to leave, there's a possibility in which that could occur. But in the event in which he's healed and ready to go this week, remember that in the last 4 competitive games in which the Browns have played against Green Bay, Detroit, Minnesota, and Miami, we have seen Quinshon Judkins score 16, 19.5, 13.3, and 26.4 fantasy points. The Jets are the 10th best matchup at the position, allowing over 15 fantasy points per game, 4.42 yards per carry on average, and just got torched by Cincinnati last time out for 167 and 2 touchdowns, Carolina for 110, Dallas for 142, and Miami for 109. Many of running backs have found success. Quinshon Judkins, assuming he's healthy, should be a fantastic play this week. Otherwise, pick up Dylan Sampson tonight to ensure if he misses, you have an alternative option for a fantastic matchup ahead. Number 12, we have Achane. The reality of the situation is, in a half PPR scoring format, the volume of receptions that he's able to get in the absence of a touchdown doesn't really make him the most valuable overall play within a given week. But the best aspect of this offense as of late has been running the football. And luckily this week they get an opportunity of taking on one of the better matchups at the position, considering over the course of the last 2 games, the Miami Dolphins offense has been utilizing a lot of 6 offensive lineman sets and a lot of run blocking from their tight ends and fullbacks. So if we're going into a script this week in which, of course, they're able to run the ball effectively against the 3rd best matchup at the position, allowing over 18 fantasy points per game on the ground to opposing running backs, 5.13 yards per carry on average. Again, many of backfields, whether it is Kansas City, Carolina, Atlanta, New England, New Orleans, Miami, all of these backfields finding a high level of success against the Buffalo Bills defense, you would assume that Achane should follow, especially considering in week 3 against this defense, had 7 receptions, 29 yards, 62 rushing yards, 12.6 fantasy points. But in the last 3 games against the Buffalo Bills, we're talking about 7, 8, and 7 receptions from Achane. So he's game script proof. He's going to find success and, of course, put together another big performance against a division rival. Number 13 is J.K. Dobbins. Look, in 8 of the last 9 games in which he has played, he has had 14 or more rushing attempts. I understand that R.J. Harvey scoring touchdowns in 3 of the last 5 games have consisted of scoring those touchdowns from inside the 5-yard line, which is certainly impacting the overall upside of J.K. Dobbins. But when you're taking on the Raiders, who are allowing 15.4 fantasy points per game, the 9th best matchup at the position, while this most recent week, Trevor Lawrence stole 2 rushing touchdowns with his legs, there could have been an even bigger game than Jacksonville provided, which was 123 and a touchdown on the ground. The week prior, Kansas City 114 and a touchdown. Indianapolis 94 and 4 touchdowns. Many of backfields finding success. So why not J.K. Dobbins and R.J. Harvey as a dynamic duo on a short week Thursday night against a division rival in which they are clearly nearly 10-point favorites within this matchup. I think it's 9.5. Moving on to our number 14, we have Jaylen Warren. Look, whether it is a positive or negative game script, he is continuing to see heavy usage. He's gotten himself 15 plus touches in 5 of the last 6 games and now has an opportunity of taking on the Chargers, who are an advantageous matchup on the ground, allowing, just recently, Tennessee to run for 84 yards, Indianapolis 113 and 3 touchdowns, Miami 129 and 2 touchdowns, Washington 124 and 2 touchdowns. So why not Jaylen Warren in an offense that is utilizing a lot of 6, maybe even sometimes 7 offensive line sets? Again, when you have that many offensive linemen in front of you, the running lanes are going to open up, and the opportunity continuing to go into Jaylen Warren's direction leads to this Chargers defense struggling to stop him this week, especially considering they're allowing 4.97 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs this season. Expect for Jaylen Warren to put together another big performance here, and hopefully, like this most recent week against the Colts, put up a big performance in which he finds himself in the end zone. Number 15, we have Breece Hall. I don't know whether or not Breece Hall is going to be traded. Obviously, prior to recording this video, I have already known about the Sauce Gardner and Kyren Williams trades. So I would be surprised if Breece Hall doesn't get traded prior to the trade deadline that is going to take place in an hour or so. I'm sure he wants out. But the fact of the matter is, if in fact he does not get traded, this week has a relatively advantageous matchup taking on the Cleveland Browns. Even though the Browns are technically the 5th toughest matchup, as of late, they have gotten torched on the ground in terms of rushing yardage. New England 124, Miami 93, Pittsburgh 89, Minnesota 70 and a touchdown. So there is a possibility for success, especially considering the Jets, as of yesterday, were 1.5-point favorites. I don't know what these trades are going to do in terms of changing the line, but there is an opportunity for Breece Hall to continue to find success, considering last time out, he torched the Cincinnati Bengals. Why not another AFC North team to become his victim this upcoming week? Moving on to our number 16, we have Ashton Jeanty. Look, receiving workload is going to determine his floor on a weekly basis. This most recent week, 5 targets, 5 catches, 47 and a touchdown. In the event in which he doesn't find that kind of success within the receiving category, we're going to be in a lot of trouble, especially considering they're 9.5-point underdogs on a short week against the Denver Broncos defense that has been incredible thus far this season and is only continuing to get better. If we have learned anything thus far this year, sure, divisional matchups on a Thursday typically lead to being a game in which the underdog performs at a greater base. But ultimately, going into this week, I do anticipate that if Ashton Jeanty does not get that kind of receiving workload, I don't believe the running lanes will be there in order to make him far more relevant than a number 16 overall position this week. Number 17, we have DeAndre Swift. This is under the assumption that he does in fact play. His status as of right now is unknown. By the time we get to tomorrow's injury designation via the practice report, we'll have an idea as to whether or not he is playing. But ultimately, in the event in which he does play, he is a fantastic play against the New York Giants, but I would anticipate him to split a lot of the overall opportunities with Kyle Monangai going forward, considering how well Monangai played in this most recent game, going for over 150 rushing yards against the Cincinnati Bengals. But again, we know that DeAndre Swift is dealing with a groin injury, and even in the event in which he isn't given the bulk majority of touches, he is still going to be the primary lead RB. He has scored 5 touchdowns in the last 6 games in which he has played on the ground through the air. It doesn't matter. And when you're taking on the 4th best matchup at the position, a defense that is allowing 5.89 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs, the last 2 games, San Francisco 159 and 2 touchdowns, Philadelphia 256 and a touchdown. You would assume DeAndre Swift, Kyle Monangai can both coexist and be fantasy relevant this week. Number 18, we have Bucky Irving. I'm hoping that the plan is for him to return after the bye week. Now we're here, week 10, after the bye week. They didn't put him on the injured reserve, and we're hoping for him to return and be ready to go. Even if he is limited and he does split opportunities with Rachaad White, considering Rachaad White has been the workload back as of late in the absence of Bucky Irving, I would anticipate that if he gets a full participation of practice by Friday of this week, he should be back to being the full workload of Bucky Irving, which is not only the complement of rushing attempts that he's going to get, but of course, the receiving workload that he is going to have to rely upon this week. In the first 4 games of his season prior to the injury, he got himself a base minimum of 4 receptions per game, and in 2 of those games scored 1 receiving touchdown. They are taking on the toughest matchup at the running back position this week. The Patriots allowing just 3.1 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs and just 6.71 fantasy points per game via rushing statistics. Therefore, anticipate for Bucky Irving to be heavily utilized within the receiving category this week, but his usage to be determined based on his practice report designation. Moving on to our number 19, we have Travis Etienne, coming off of a solid week of a total of 27 touches, an incredible overall workload of opportunity, getting it done on the ground through the air. Everyone scoring a rushing touchdown except for him. Trevor Lawrence coming away with 2, Bashaw Tutin scoring a rushing touchdown, but he did have 5 rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line, just wasn't able to get the job done. But going forward, should have an opportunity, especially this week against Houston, to be relevant, because last time out against Houston in week 3, had himself 56 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown, 11.6 fantasy points in a victory against this elite defense. And with Davis Mills prepping to start for the Texans this week as CJ Stroud is in the concussion protocol, I would anticipate for a lot of opportunity to go in the direction of this offense and specifically Travis Etienne as they mount an early lead and are able to run the ball for majority of this game against this Houston Texans defense. Number 20 is Kenneth Walker. Now, speaking of rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line, even though Kenneth Walker did not come away with a rushing touchdown this most recent week, and neither did Zach Charbonnet. In fact, we saw AJ Barner with a tush push. Nonetheless, Kenneth Walker was given goal line carries this week, while Zach Charbonnet did not see a single red zone rushing attempt. Therefore, if there's going to be an opportunity for Kenneth Walker to get those goal line carries going forward, we've completely flipped the script, and he could be the more valuable running back and easily be top 12 for the remainder of the season based on his overall efficiency and the way that this offense is trending. This week, they take on the Arizona Cardinals, who back in week 4 against them, Kenneth Walker had himself 20 touches, over 110 yards, and 11.5 fantasy points. So if we're going to be in a position taking on a defense that's allowing 13 plus fantasy points per game on the ground, 4.3 yards per carry. Again, the Dallas Cowboys, outside of that fumble, Javonte Williams was running well. Green Bay scored 2 touchdowns against them. Indianapolis 130 in a touchdown. Tennessee 84 in a touchdown. Seattle, again, last time out, they combined for 120 in a touchdown against them. Kenneth Walker, if given the goal line opportunities, could be an incredible back this week. Number 21, speaking of goal line opportunities, we have David Montgomery, who is coming away with his 4th game out of 8 with a single rushing touchdown. Again, if we're going to be in a position in which he continues to be given goal line opportunities, of course, he'll be relevant. And now that we have Jaden Daniels out, the Commanders are in trouble. That offense is going to struggle, and once they do, it's going to provide even more opportunities for the Lions, who are 8.5-point road favorites, to go in there and batter this run-stop defense that has allowed 126 and 2 touchdowns to Atlanta, 133 to Chicago, 145 and a touchdown to Dallas, 106 and a touchdown to Kansas City, and most recently, Seattle with 7 176, which is an underwhelming performance, but ultimately, Seattle did not need to run the ball to find success. They were getting it done through the air. Nonetheless, this week, David Montgomery has a high likelihood to fall into the end zone and be fantasy relevant at a top 24 capacity once again. Then we move on to our number 22, Kyle Monangai. Again, coming off of 26 carries for 176, 3 catches for 22 yards. Again, when you're able to come away with 198 yards, 20 plus fantasy points in the absence of DeAndre Swift, if DeAndre Swift was to miss again, I would genuinely put him in the B tier, maybe even in the A tier this week, as they take on the Giants, the 4th best matchup at the position. This defense is allowing 5.89 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs. Just got torched for 159 and 2 touchdowns to San Francisco and 256 and a touchdown to Philadelphia. Again, the status of DeAndre Swift as of this current moment is unknown, but as we get closer to Sunday, it'll be far more clear. And in the event in which DeAndre Swift is absent, do not forget that in this most recent game, Kyle Monangai had 10 rushing attempts of 7 or more yards. They were getting it done on the ground, to say the very least. Number 23, we have Kimani Vidal. I understand that he got replaced in the second half by Jarrett Patterson, and I'm hoping that's not going to take place once again. But ultimately, in 2 of the last 4 weeks, we have seen Kimani Vidal either be an incredible stud of going over 110 rushing yards or being a guy in which they're not utilizing very much because his effectiveness has not been there. With Joe Alt having a season-ending ankle injury, this is unfortunate, and of course, with the Steelers trending off of a game in which they were able to not only force a bunch of turnovers, but effectively stop the run of Jonathan Taylor, it leads me to believe that Kimani Vidal should be considered a lesser option going into the given week, considering the potential of a backfield that may be a two-headed monster as we approach the remainder of the upcoming weeks here. But again, still has decent value considering the offense he's associated with and the volume of touches he's been exposed to as of late. Number 24, we have RJ Harvey. Look, in 3 of the last 6 games, he has scored 1 touchdown minimum. In those games, 14, 17, 23 fantasy points. In the other 3 games in which he has been without a touchdown, 4.5, 6.7, 4.5. So again, unless he scores a touchdown, which he has done 3 of his last 5 touchdowns from inside the 5-yard line, which is very much so unexpected considering they do have J.K. Dobbins, he's also been a big playmaker, scoring a 40-yard rushing touchdown and most recently a 27-yard receiving touchdown down the sideline against the Houston Texans. This week they take on the Raiders, the 9th best matchup at the position. This defense has gotten torched by Jacksonville, Kansas City, Indianapolis, Chicago, Washington. It doesn't matter who. They have found a lot of success, and hopefully RJ Harvey can find himself finding even more success in the second half as they blow out this Raiders defense. Moving on to our number 25, Zach Charbonnet. He didn't have a single rushing attempt in the red zone this most recent week. Those went in the direction of course, Kenneth Walker and A.J. Barner. So in the event in which he is not given those opportunities, his value goes to the absolute floor of production, to being even outside potentially of the top 36. But I'm going to hope that he's going to be given those opportunities this week to keep him fantasy relevant, because last time out against his defense, had himself over 40 yards and a touchdown to get his 10-point, base floor of production, which we continue to see him be able to find on a weekly basis. The Cardinals are an advantageous matchup, allowing over 13 fantasy points per game, 4.3 yards per carry, and we're hoping that the touchdown opportunities will be there. Otherwise, he's very much so going to be a 5 to 6 point player within a given week in a half PPR scoring format. Number 26, we have Aaron Jones. I genuinely would increase his ranking once I know his overall injury status. I know that he's dealing with an AC shoulder joint sprain, and in the event in which he does end up missing time, Jordan Mason would go ahead and increase his overall rankings in comparison to where I currently have him ranked. But Jordan Mason was dealing with his injury last season, and anytime Jordan Mason took a big hit on that shoulder, would leave the game and not return. So that's my primary concern with Aaron Jones going into this week as they take on the Baltimore Ravens. But in the event in which he can stay healthy, even though the Ravens are the 5th best matchup at the position, allowing 4.6 yards per carry on average and 16 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs via rushing statistics this season, I would anticipate to see a lot of Aaron Jones this week because of the receiving workload in a negative game script. When you're taking on Baltimore and they're ahead and you're in that negative game script, you'll have to pass the ball for a bunch. Even though the Dolphins ran for 4.5 yards per carry on average this most recent week, they had to abandon the run game late and had to look to targeting Achane 10 times within the given game, which hopefully would be the overall usage share of Aaron Jones this week. Speaking of receiving utilization, we have Woody Marks. With CJ Stroud potentially in that concussion protocol and probably not playing. We have Davis Mills at quarterback. Last season, 2024, week 18, Davis Mills had 5 targets in the direction of his running backs on 22 attempts. Again, there is going to be some utilization there, but they are taking on the Jaguars, who are the 3rd toughest matchup at the position, allowing just 3.64 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs. Again, the Jaguars have allowed technically the 6th most receptions per game to opposing running backs, so we're hoping for Davis Mills to check it down in the direction of Woody Marks for a majority of this upcoming game. Number 28, we have Tracy, who is another running back who is very much so going to be reliant on receiving workload alongside of Aaron Jones and Woody Marks. Again, we have Tracy, who in this most recent week was outsnapped by Devin Singletary 32-25, and this looked a lot like Tracy's overall usage early on in his rookie year prior to the Devin Singletary injury. But this week we're hoping for a lot more utilization and hopefully a script that is going to be a positive one to allow for Tyrone Tracy to get more workload, taking on the Bears, who are allowing over 5 yards per carry on average, as they are the 12th best matchup at the position. This most recent week, even though the Bengals weren't able to find the most success on the ground, Chase Brown, 14 targets, 8 catches. That would be a crazy number for Tracy this upcoming week, but the possibility is certainly there. Number 29, Rhamondre Stevenson. Tyrell Williams' overall usage this most recent week was incredibly promising because it didn't allow for TreVeyon Henderson to run away with the job. So that is promising for Stevenson and his potential return, which is it going to be this week? I have no clue. He did not practice a single time last week, so this is to be determined. But in the event in which, of course, we have an opportunity of Rhamondre Stevenson back in the lineup, he is going to be donated the vast majority of the goal line opportunities. He'll fall into the end zone just in the same way in which Tyrell Williams did this most recent week and will be a solid top 30 option within the upcoming matchup. Speaking of our number 30, we have Rachaad White taking on the New England Patriots, the toughest matchup at the position, like I mentioned earlier, with Bucky Irving. I don't know what Bucky Irving's overall status is, much less his overall workload. So in the event in which Bucky Irving does get a full practice participation at least once this week, I anticipate for Rachaad White to be the number 2 option, but is still going to see enough opportunity considering he has earned a job to get in the mix as we proceed forward, considering how well he has played over the course of the last 4 weeks here in the absence of Bucky Irving. Number 31 is TreVeyon Henderson. The Patriots currently envision him to have a specific role, and they don't want to expand that beyond what it currently sits at. So in the event in which this week he's going to get himself 8 to 10 touches, I would anticipate him to still be in a top 36 capacity considering his effectiveness within the opportunities on the ground through the year as of late. Technically, the Buccaneers are only allowing 3.9 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs, so we're hoping for a lot of receiving utilization, much like this most recent week in which he had 6 targets, 4 catches, and 32 receiving yards. Number 32 is Jordan Mason, who again is dealing with the fact that he has now been the RB2 of this offense for 2 consecutive games. His value has plummeted, but Aaron Jones is dealing with a shoulder injury. So in the event in which Aaron Jones misses this week, or in fact leaves the game early due to that injury, Jordan Mason could be a value taking on the 5th best matchup at the running back position. But Jordan Mason's overall usage share as the primary early down runner of this offense is purely going to be determined on whether or not this is a negative game script. If the Minnesota Vikings can keep this competitive, Jordan Mason could very easily be a top 36 running back this week in comparison to his most recent games in which he's been 4 or 5 points at very most. Number 33 is Alvin Kamara. Speaking of 4 to 5 points, we would have loved to have seen 4 to 5 points this most recent week. Coming away with 0.2 fantasy points, Alvin Kamara has been a disaster. It is unbelievable what Kellen Moore has turned Alvin Kamara to, and no wonder Alvin Kamara doesn't want to be traded because genuinely, he doesn't have to touch the ball at all. He gets 6-7 touches a game. He gets his game check. He goes home. He's healthy. He's active. He doesn't have to rehab. He's in paradise right now. Genuinely. Nonetheless, they're taking on the Panthers, the 15th best matchup at the position, allowing 4.87 yards per carry on average, 13.69 fantasy points per game. Is Kamara going to have himself a solid week here? I doubt it. But nonetheless, still have to mention him considering he's a starting running back in the NFL. Number 34, speaking of another starting running back who has been beyond underwhelming, his most recent games have put up 4.6, 2.5, 3.7, and 5.3 fantasy points. Like I mentioned earlier yesterday in regards to Chris Rodriguez, Jeremy McNichols, it seems like Jacory Croskey-Merritt has ran himself out of a job. And with the upcoming weeks without Jaden Daniels, there's even less opportunity for touchdowns in the direction of Jacory Croskey-Merritt unless he's able to somehow, some way put together a big effective game in terms of getting 4 to 5 yards per carry on average like he was earlier on in this season. Number 35 is Trey Benson. This is 100% speculatory as to whether or not he is going to be returning. Even when he does return, it's going to be a committee situation with DeMercado and Bam Knight there. So nonetheless, this week taking on Seattle, who is the fourth toughest matchup at the position, allowing 3.18 yards per carry on average. I wouldn't expect much outside of some receiving utilization for Trey Benson, as I assume he would be the starting running back and get majority of not only the rushing attempts and receiving workload in a negative game script this week, regardless of who's playing quarterback. The final running back I wanted to mention is Nick Chubb. Like I mentioned before, the Jaguars are the third toughest matchup at the position, 3.64 yards per carry on average. This is expected to be a negative game script primarily because of Davis Mills starting at quarterback, so it will mean a less scoring potential for Nick Chubb and less pure opportunity in terms of rushing attempts this week. All right, that's going to cover it in regards to my top 36 running back rankings. Again, do not forget rankings are subject to change. I'll be back later tonight live streaming on the channel. But if you guys have any questions that you want to send me off of the live stream, you can send it via the Patreon by signing up today via the 2025 Fantasy Football Champion tier. Not only will you be able to ask me any and all fantasy football questions regarding waiver wire pickups, trade questions, starter sit questions, you'll get my ranking sent to you every single Thursday and of course Sunday, and you'll get access to the exclusive Patreon only Discord server. Like I mentioned before, again tonight via the Betr Play, we are taking going to be Joel Embiid more than 19.5 points and Cole Anthony more than 7.5 points, 2.7x. Take advantage of that. I'll see you guys later tonight, and until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.